This podcast contains explicit content and is intended for mature audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Don't say we didn't warn you.
Hi, my name is Madison, and you are listening to Who's Knocking, a true crime podcast. And today we have a little knocker for you. That's a little series that we're doing of shorter episodes just to include in the mix and to be able to talk about cases or stories that are a little bit less or have a little bit less substance to them. Not necessarily substance, but just are a little bit shorter stories. So there you have it. This episode is brought to you by my newsletter, Grim Weekly. If you would like to sign up for my true crime newsletter, please go to grimweekly.com and you can sign up there. It's just a little something every week. Comes out on Fridays. Obviously, it's all true crime, a little bit of news, recommendations, and, whatever's going on true crime-wise that week. I like to say it's a little bit of curated true crime content. So yeah, please sign up. It's free. Today, we're going to be talking about a case, and I think this is going to be a little bit of a series of cases that haunt me, cases that live in my mind rent-free, that just they're always there. I'll always remember them. I'll always remember the details. And specifically, there's two specific cases, and this is one of them, that have definitely affected me for my entire life since they happened, and definitely affect my behavior to this day. Today's case is the case of the murder of Holly Jones. And this happened when I was 9 years old, almost 10, and it greatly affected a lot of people around me. I remember it very vividly. It happened in my city, and this Holly Jones, the little girl. Her face is just burned into my brain. I remember the way my parents kind of handled it at the time. My mom, when I say my parents, I mean my mom. She spoke to us about it. At first they kind of didn't talk to us about it, and then finally they sat us down and were like, "This happened to this girl, and everybody's kind of worried about it." And it was a very, very big deal here. And instead of talking about it, let me just get into it. So, Holly Jones was born on September 14th, 1992, and in May of 2003, Holly was living in the West End neighborhood of Toronto, in a neighborhood called The Junction. This is a West End neighborhood that I'm extremely familiar with. I live in Toronto. I'm not going to say where I live, but, there's a lot of neighborhoods that I frequent a lot, and this is one of them. I don't know where her house is. I've never looked into that, but there's another house in this story, and I know exactly where it is. I actually go by it quite often. So this is very, very, very real to me. And Holly is actually only basically 1 year older than me. So I was very close to her age when this happened. I'm very close to her age my entire life. But to this day in May was the first day that Holly was permitted to walk home by herself, unaccompanied by an adult. I believe she had gone to school, then she had gone to hang out with one of her friends, and then they left from where they were hanging out. They walked together to the other girl's house, and then Holly was to walk from that girl's house to her own house. And this was a very short walk. This was a few blocks. Even in the world we live in now, and we did in 2003, where parents don't let their kids do anything by themselves, this should not have been a big deal. Parents should not have to worry about their 10-year-old child walking a couple blocks by themselves in complete daylight in a very safe city. Toronto is an extremely safe city. Anyway, she walked home by herself, but she never ended up arriving home. Of course, all the sirens come out as soon as I start recording. Anyway, Holly did not show up at home, and a huge hunt began. Everyone was terrified. Stranger abductions were such a rare occurrence, and because of this, obviously her parents were looked at it first. They were very quickly ruled out. It was very obvious that they had nothing to do with it. They pleaded with the media looking for Holly. I mean, I can't imagine what these people were thinking. The very first time they let her walk by herself and this happens. The guilt that her parents must have felt, and they shouldn't have, but I'm sure they did, must have just been horrific. So she goes missing that day, and it was actually the next day that a suitcase washed up on the shore of the Wards Island beach. And now I'll just have to explain a little bit. So there's a city of Toronto, and it sits on the edge, like the edge, the south edge is Lake Ontario. And a little ways across the lake is an island that is called the Toronto Islands, and it's kind of split up into three main sections. There's the center part is a little children's amusement park. Then there's some beaches, and then one side is all residents, people who actually live on the island. And that I'm actually quite familiar with that neighborhood as well. I've known a few people who live there, spent some time there as well. And it's a great little community. It's like people who live in those houses. It's a very interesting situation where like you get a 99-year lease. You actually only rent the property. I believe this is still the case. And so people like pass it down through generations, but nobody actually owns the homes. But they're all like very interesting little intricate houses. It's all walkable pathways. There's no driving on the island. It's all like biking and walking and stuff. But it's a very like close-knit kind of hippie community with like people who garden, and you know, everybody knows each other on the island, let's just say. So the suitcase washes up on the island, and somebody comes across it, and inside is the body of Holly Jones, completely dismembered. So it's just, she's in multiple pieces. Inside the suitcase, there is also some weights. Clearly somebody meant to weigh this suitcase down. And on her body, they find male DNA, and they also find some green carpet fibers. So this was obviously devastating. Everybody clearly hoped that this girl would come home. It was awful. And the fact that they found her in the state that she was in was crazy. And it's, like I said, such a rare occurrence. Stranger abductions are super rare occurrence. In Toronto, abductions in general are extremely rare. And with such the like obvious violence towards a child was, you know, it was awful. Toronto has the odd like gun victim. Mostly if there's any gun victims, it's generally gang related. There was a really awful like drive-by shooting of a girl many years ago, kind of around this time. And that was, you know, another case that was awful, and I remember it very well. But this was obviously so intentional and just brutal. So people were shook, very shook. My mother, very shook. Okay, I'm sure after that we did not go anywhere, but not that we were going anywhere by ourselves, because anyway, that's my mom. But they find the suitcase, and so they have the DNA, but that's all they have, and they compare it to everybody in the database. Nobody comes up, and that's essentially all they have. So the police are investigating, and they're having a hard time. It's always especially difficult to investigate stranger abductions, obviously, because there's no like ties to the victim. And of course they're assuming it's a stranger abduction because they've ruled out Holly's family and like extended family and stuff. So what the police did, which was it was quite an unorthodox approach at the time, and, somewhat ethically debatable, is they took the neighborhood and drew some parameters, and then they went door to door and asked every male in the home of every house to voluntarily give them a DNA sample. This was something that had been done before, but in extremely rare cases. The police had promised, they said, look, you do not have to give a DNA. We want to go and systematically rule out every male in the neighborhood. If you don't want to give us your DNA, you don't have to, but we'll have to rule you out in some other way. And they said, if you give us your sample, it will not go into any other databases. It will only be used to be compared against this sample, and then it will be destroyed. I'm sure not everybody believed that, but that was their promise, and it seems like that's what happened. So they go door to door, and they got a lot of people to give their DNA. Most people really wanted to see this case solved, so there was a lot of compliance. But then a set of detectives, or I don't know if it was just, I'm pretty sure it was just police, they arrive at this one house, and I know this house that is one dwelling with a couple units in it, and it is situated on Bloor Street. So the Junction is a West End neighborhood of Toronto, and Bloor is there's two really big major streets in Toronto. There's Yonge Street, which goes north-south, and then there is Bloor Danforth. So one half of it, the east half of it is called the Danforth, and the west half of it is called Bloor Street. And so this house was on Bloor Street. So Bloor Street is a very busy street. That's where one of the main subway lines is. There's lots of foot traffic here, and should be a very safe street to be walking on. But they walk up to this house, and they knock on the door, and this man answers the door, and he's like a little huffalump of a troll-like guy, probably playing video games. His name is Michael Briere, and Michael answers the door, and they asked, hey, we're taking DNA in the neighborhood, we're trying to solve this murder, will you give us some of your DNA? And he said no. Okay, that's fine. You don't have to. But because of that, they, circled his name and thought we have to eliminate him some other way. Now, while the detectives were there, they noticed a couple things. One, they saw a green carpet. Two, in his apartment, they saw some weights, specifically weights that matched the ones inside the suitcase. And three, they got a strong smell of bleach that was emanating Michael Briere's apartment. He was cleaning up something. So they took note of that, and they thought, okay, we got to eliminate this guy. Seems like he's got all the pieces here. Let's follow him. So they started following him, hoping that he would discard of something that they could collect his DNA off of. And now Michael Briere, he went about his business like nothing was wrong, totally normal guy, just completely fine, normal situation. And eventually, he had a can of soda, and he threw that can of soda in the garbage when he was finished drinking it. And the police took it, and they tested the DNA, and they compared it to the DNA found on Holly Jones, and it matched. Michael Briere was Holly Jones's killer. So, of course, they arrested him, and they interrogated him, and he admitted to it. He admitted to all of it. So at one point during his interview, he said that he thought she was dead, and then he put her into his fridge, and then later he heard and it was her fighting to get out, and so he went in and he strangled her, and then he dismembered her and put her in the suitcase. And now the police say that Michael probably would have gotten away with this had the current of the lake taken her out to the middle of the lake. But because she essentially just got stuck on the islands, because I'm sure he sent her from the mainland, and then she ended up getting stuck on the beach of the island. Had she gone all the way out, she would have gone to the middle of the lake and then eventually sunk, and nobody probably would have found her at that point. So in that sense, we were very lucky that it just so happened that the current took her that way. Michael was tried and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 25 years, which is the harshest sentence you can receive in Canada. I highly doubt that he will ever get out. It's been, next year will be 20 years since the murder. At his trial at the end, this is what he had to say. What I did was absolutely wrong. It was done out of selfishness. It was the act of a coward. I accept the sentence which you are about to give me. No one has stood in front of you as been more deserving of a sentence. I stand by my words when I told the police, a man who commits these crimes you put away. You put away for good. I take no pride in what I have done. The truth is, I'm ashamed beyond belief. I regret everything. I am really sorry. I really wish I could undo everything. I have failed as a human being. End quote. And no one believed that. I think everybody knew that he just was upset that he got caught. From the time that the police started looking at him to the time that he was arrested, he was completely fine. He was going about his day, doing whatever he had been doing. Now, here's what we know about Michael Briere. We know that he was a dirty little pedophile who enjoyed watching child porn and probably yanking it to it. Ugh, disgusting. So fucking disgusting. Ugh. And he got drunk that day and he decided that he was going to go out and find a child to victimize. It was purely random that he chose Holly. He said if it hadn't been her, it would have been somebody else. And it was the first child that he came across that was alone that he figured he could take, and he did. There were some witnesses who remember seeing her with him that day walking down Bloor Street, and he just looked like a kind of an angry father with his daughter who like maybe had done something, but nothing out of the ordinary. And he did say, had she screamed, I probably would have let her go. So if there's one lesson you can take from this to, kind of try to teach your children is no matter what, scream. If somebody has a gun to your back, scream. Maybe you'll get shot, but maybe you'll live. And the alternative could be way worse, as we're seeing now. Now, this case, as I said before, this case has haunted me my entire life. I think about Holly Jones often, especially now that I have kids of my own. Toronto to me is a safe city. I know a lot of, especially women, talk about how they're scared walking around at night. I am not scared walking around at night. I listen to horrible shit all the time. I've always felt very safe in this city. I walk around at night by myself. Not all the time, but I do. There's obviously sketchy areas and nicer areas like any city, but this specific case really, I think, changed things for a lot of people. But even with that being said, I am of the opinion, and I think it might be, somewhat controversial, especially in this space, but I even seeing something like this, I don't think that people should live their lives like something like this will happen. It could happen, but probably it won't. It is so rare for a stranger to abduct a child. So rare. So rare that it's almost, there are things you can do to prepare yourself, of course, and you should do them, absolutely. But being scared to let your children walk a few blocks, that's sad. I think that, 10-year-old children should be able to walk the streets of Toronto by themselves during the day. So I know that this brought fear into a lot of people, but I don't know. It just makes me sad that that's the case. And I hope that Holly's parents are doing okay. I hope that they've been able to find a little bit of peace in their lives. I know that, when something like this happens, there's no solving it. There's no there's no moving on from it. There's nothing that will make it okay. I just hope that they're doing as best that they can be doing. And I know that a lot of people still think about Holly. I do all the time. And that's the story of Holly Jones and her extremely, extremely unfortunate run-in with Michael Briere, a dirty, nasty sexual predator and child killer. So that's your little knocker for the day. That is a case that haunts me. If you want to say anything about that, please comment below and please subscribe. That would be pretty dope. Sorry, my hair is a nasty mess. I am on Instagram at Who's Knocking Podcast, Twitter at Who's Knocking Pod. You can email me, hello@whosknocking.com. And please stay safe out there, because you never know who's knocking. This podcast is produced in collaboration with Lost Line Media. Artwork by August Digital. Music by Matthew Cook.